Hey, it's Tim back for Wrong Sports Episode 3, and today we're going to talk about the Tulane Green Wave basketball team from the mid-'80s. If you don't know them, yeah, they're not that much of a powerhouse. They were never really thought of as a major power, not even really a mid-major power throughout the 70s and 80s. They were still producing really good teams. They played in the Metro Conference at the time. Now they play with the American Conference, and the Metro Conference at the time in the mid-'80s was actually pretty darn good. They had a few national championships in there, winners like Louisville, and they made it to the Final Four a couple of times, as well as Memphis, who made it to the Final Four in the mid-'80s as well. So the Metro Conference was a pretty good conference, but towards the late 80s, with a new defensive style and a future NBA first-round draft pick, Tulane was actually becoming really, really good, and they actually had a tournament team ready to do some damage on a national stage. But that was when their whole team and pretty much everything surrounding Tulane basketball imploded on itself. So anyway, like I said before, Tulane wasn't really in the NCAA or the NIT tournament throughout their first season in 1905 to 1980. They were never in any postseason tournament whatsoever. They were looking for a change, and they went towards a defensive-minded coach in Ned Fowler. Now, even though Ned Fowler kind of looks like a middle school teacher, he was actually really good, and he made a difference pretty quickly. He also had some help from a freshman that he recruited in John Hot Rod Williams. Remember him because he will become very important later in the story. Also, Ned Fowler earned the Metro Conference Coach of the Year honors in his first season in 1981-82. And that season, he guided Tulane Green Wave to a 19-9 record and a berth in the NIT, which is the school's first postseason tournament invitation ever. Tulane would then return to the NIT the next year and finish 19-12. And Fowler's teams were pretty good his last two seasons, being 17-11. It was also where everything fell apart, not only for Coach Fowler, but for the team and for the school. Well, the implosion really started on February 2nd, 1985. Tulane was 10-8 on the season. They were 3-4 in the Metro Conference, and they were trying to win a majority of their last 10 games so they could maybe get another NIT berth, or maybe they would win a couple of conference tournament games and then maybe potentially get to the NCAA tournament. Unfortunately, not everyone on campus or the team were looking at the season, but they were looking at making some quick money off the season and also getting some other substances as well. Now, according to a Sports Illustrated article that was actually made on April 8th, 1985, so 2 months after the original implosion there, they reported that on Groundhog's Day 1985, that's February 2nd, Tulane student Gary Krantz approached Green Wave senior forward Clyde Eads. Now, the two of them have become friends that year as Krantz provided cocaine to him and others on campus. So basically, a big drug dealer was the one who thought of this whole scheme. Along with Eads being friends with him, and they did drugs together with other frat brothers that Gary Krantz was friends with. They also got into sports gambling, and they were looking to make a very quick payday. Now, the idea was as simple as most point-shaving schemes go. Tulane was playing Southern Miss that night, and Tulane needed to win the game by fewer than a 10.5-point spread. Eads realized he couldn't do it alone, so he and France looked for other players on the team to help him. After some negotiating and also mostly using cocaine, Eads ended up getting forward and starter John Johnson, as well as guard David Dominique, and guard Bobby Thompson with the scheme. But they wanted to make sure that the scheme would actually work, so they had to go out and get the biggest fish on the team, and that was leading scorer Hot Rod Williams. Now, there was little time after all this scheming to even bet on the USM game, but the frat brothers managed to wager $7,000 on it through various sports books in the New Orleans area. Even though the scheme was put together quickly, it still worked, and Tulane won the game by 1 point, so way under that 10.5-point spread. So the frat brothers collected their money very easily, and Williams, Eads, and Johnson got $900 each, while Dominique and Thompson each got $400. Now, it's not really known while everyone was paid differently, but you had to assume that Eads was paid more because he was the one who thought of the scheme, and Hot Rod Williams was paid more because he was one of the highest scorers on the team. Not sure why the other two guys got $400, but anyway, they would all meet at Krant's apartment. They partook in some cocaine, and while high on this, literally one player was heard to say, "Hey, we won the game, and we still got all this money." But after the one successful point-shaving game, the frat brothers and the team wanted to do it again. But some of the players were getting a little nervous. According to court documents that was actually referenced in the Sports Illustrated article above, it came out that forward John Johnson and the originator of the scheme, Clyde Eads, were not feeling the scheme anymore, and they probably didn't want to get caught because it did kind of look obvious, them only winning the game by 1 point. So they were arguing about the scheme, and they were supposed to do another point-shaving game happening on February 20th against Virginia Tech, but the players couldn't agree on it, so they ended up not doing it. So the group ended up settling on a game against Memphis, who was 20-2 at the time, and they were ranked in the top 5. And this game was also matching up Tulane's best player in Williams with Memphis's best player in Keith Lee. The spread was 7.5 points favoring Memphis, and they agreed on the game with a few days in advance. So this allowed Krantz and some of his other frat brothers to get $34,000 to place on this game. Since they didn't want anyone locally to know that the fix might be in, since betting $34,000 on a Tulane regular season basketball game would draw a few red flags in New Orleans, they flew a couple of guys out to Las Vegas and gave them $18,000 so that they could wager it on the game. With the remaining $16,000, they put $10,000 in a Birmingham bookie, with the remaining $6,000 placed in New Orleans with a bookmaker who was also a Tulane student. So there's already trouble brewing here. Anyway, though, the matchup was sold for TV as a matchup with two NBA likely players in Hot Rod Williams and Memphis's Keith Lee. The game started strong for Tulane as they led throughout most of the first half, and Hot Rod Williams was outplaying Memphis's Lee. Then, with about a minute and a half left in the first half, something strange happened. And this is all from Crescent Sports' 25th anniversary on the Tulane scandal. They said, quote, Memphis State inbounded the ball from the sideline. The Tigers had trouble finding an open man. So Lee came out to midcourt to take the pass, with Williams close behind. Williams then reached in and was whistled for the foul. This was Williams' third. Also sitting on the sideline and near the play was Times-Picayune columnist Peter Finley, who is a legend in the Southeast and especially in Louisiana. He responded after that foul, "If I didn't know any better, I'd have thought he did that on purpose." But nothing much else was said about it afterwards, and Keith Lee would then make the two free throws, and at half, Tulane led by 6, 34-28. But according to the Sports Illustrated article on April 8th, 1985, Clyde Eads knew that they needed to start losing. So he met with some of the Green Wave players in the bathroom, and they agreed that they should come out and allow Memphis to score early in the second half. And that's exactly what they did, as Memphis's best player, Lee, tied up the game at 34 after making 3 straight baskets to start the second half. Memphis would then go on a 26-15 run to end the game after several players on Tulane were not playing up to their standard. Clyde Eads would be one of those, as he not only was the one who thought of this point-shaving scheme, but he also looked terrible in the second half, as he took 1 shot and he had 5 turnovers. And Eads was known to be a hot shot taker, and he didn't take nearly any shots in the second half. Eads would later claim that he had a wrist injury. That was why he didn't shoot more, but that was never really further looked at, nor does anyone really know if that can be confirmed. Hot Rod Williams, meanwhile, was 0 for 2 and 2 for 4 in the second half after playing very hard in the first half. Memphis would go on to win 60-49. They would cover that 7.5 point spread, but it was also telling something was going on, because once Memphis got an 8-point lead, it never got lower than that throughout the last few minutes of the game. After the game, the players received $13,500, with the largest share, approximately $4,500, going to Hot Rod Williams. So this brought Williams' total to $5,400. The players were asked by the frat brothers to throw the last game. The players didn't really want to do it, as they were winless. The entire school, Tulane, was winless up to that point against Louisville. So the players insisted that they would play this game for real, and they ended up winning. Louisville next year would go on to win the national championship, so this is a pretty big win for Tulane at the end of the season. Tulane would also go on to win their final regular season game, but they looked flat in their conference tournament and thus ended their season and ended their chances of fixing any more games. It's also not known if the conference championship game was point shaved, but that wasn't really looked at either. But this wasn't the end of all this. A week or two after Tulane's final game, a big fan and benefactor of Tulane, as well as an attorney, Ned Conkey, heard some point-shaving-related rumors from his brother, who was also the assistant district attorney in the New Orleans area. Conkey would end up doing his own investigation because he wanted to make sure that these rumors weren't true, or in his mind wanted to make sure they weren't true. But unfortunately, he found a lot more than he wanted to find. Both brothers then contacted the district attorney, Harry Connick Sr.'s office. Yes, he's the father of the fairly famous singer and actor Harry Connick Jr., but Conkey would later take Eads on a short car ride and explain to him immunity. And immunity was exactly what Clyde Eads wanted, except he wanted another player on the team to also get immunity, and that was forward John Johnson. Conkey agreed, and once they got those two, their information set the stage for the first arrests on the night of March 26th. Hot Rod Williams and frat student Gary Krantz were arrested that night, and Williams was the only player in the point-shaving scandal to stand trial. Some of the other players were also arrested, but they were not sentenced to any jail time, and actually most of them were sentenced to community service as part of their plea agreement. The trial had Williams charged with sports bribery and conspiracy, and his final trial ended with a mistrial, but during his second trial, a jury found him not guilty on all 5 counts. So yes, Williams got away with this too. So really, in the long run, everyone made their money, and the only thing that got hurt was Tulane University. And then Tulane president Dr. Emmon Kelly had a law firm from outside New Orleans investigate the allegations, but nothing regarding point shaving had turned up by the time the first arrests were made. Something else did, though, because he found out that head coach Ned Fowler and 2 of his assistants admitted to making payments to players. So on April 4th, 1985, about a week or so after the arrests of Williams and Gary Krantz, Kelly would announce that he was making his recommendation to the University Board of Administrators to disband the entire men's basketball program, mostly due to the scheme, but mostly due to the payment of players. Head coach Fowler and his 2 assistants put in their resignations as well. And Kelly wasn't really mad at his players. He was more mad at the coaches and the adults running the team and the sports teams on campus, since they didn't find this out first. And even though there was money and drugs exchanging hands, again, he was more mad at the adults running the organization than he was mad at the students who were a part of this scheme. Tulane dropped their men's basketball program for about 4 years, and it was also impacting the other teams on campus because they had to leave the Metro Conference, because the only way you could stay in the Metro Conference was to have a men's basketball program. After protests for years, though, Dr. Kelly would see that students on campus loved the game and asking for it to be reinstated. So he did reinstate the men's basketball program. For the 1989 season, they hired Perry Clark, who was a former Georgia Tech assistant, and after 2 years, he ended up getting Tulane to their first NCAA tournament. So I guess it's really all a happy ending. The players were stupid. They went for the bait and took it. Hot Rod Williams, he made some money, even though he was publicly arrested and shamed for about a year or 2. He was drafted into the NBA. He played for over 10 years. And after the 1989-90 season, he actually re-signed with the Cavaliers for 7 years and $26.5 million. So quite a payday from that $5,400 he made on the point shave. So really, in the long run, Hot Rod Williams didn't really lose much at all. Clyde Eads, who was the ringleader in all of this, he made a few $1,000s. He got some drugs, but he also got immunity, so he didn't really lose anything. Meanwhile, head coach Ned Fowler, he lost a lot because not only did he lose his job, but he also had to lay low for about a year or 2. He was an assistant at Auburn, but he eventually became a head coach at Stephen F. Austin before they moved up to Division I, so he became another head coach as well. So really, this case was all about players who were greedy and they wanted more, but in the long run, the Tulane players got away with it, and they actually made the whole system of college basketball look a lot worse. So if I have to say, I would give this point shaving scandal probably a D+, because they didn't make a lot of money, and yeah, granted, it worked out for them and they didn't get caught. They only did it for 2 games, so they didn't do it for the whole season. This isn't like a Boston College scheme. This isn't like the NYU scheme. It's more on a small scale, and the players should really be thanking their lucky stars that they got immunity and only got community service out of this, because a lot of players who have been involved in gambling and point shaving schemes have been disbarred from the NCAA forever. So thank you so much for hanging out with me and listening to Wrong Sports Episode 3. Like, share, and subscribe. I'm going to have Episode 4 out in a couple of weeks, and that is going to be about the Kentucky basketball scandal. Which one, you ask? Oh, the one in 1989. We'll talk about that coming up in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much.